I did more about alcoholism yesterday, but it only recorded like 7 minutes of it out of an hour. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. But this is more about alcoholism. Okay. And where we left off on the first time was the crux of the problem. All right. So, what sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? Of what is he thinking? Our first example, so now this is a story. They're going to give you an example. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. So what they're talking about is what is the thinking that precedes a relapse into drinking? Okay. What the hell is going on with that? Because that's obviously the crux of the problem that after so many times of bad things happening, how is it that they return to drinking? So, our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He is a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition, which, if he has a commendable war record, that might be PTSD. But back in the day, they called that like shell shocked. They weren't really sure what it is now, like as we know it now. They didn't have that understanding back then. So a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35, maybe because he has PTSD. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated, again, maybe he has PTSD, that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. So even if he does have PTSD from World War One, it doesn't mean he's not an alcoholic as well. Okay. So we told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. Hello. And the answer we had found, he made a beginning. His family was reassembled and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge upon his spiritual life. And I have that highlighted. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. Yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. So now, this is Jim's story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. Okay, so it's a little resentment. And it'll tell you in our literature that resentment is the number one offender and that it destroys more alcoholics than anything else. What about drinking? Well, resentment actually destroys more alcoholics than anything else. But what about drinking? Resentment, motherfuckers, is the number one offender. So here's Jim, had a resentment, and it says he failed to enlarge upon his spiritual life. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, resentment, but nothing serious, justification. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. So he had been there many times and stayed sober. Okay. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. And then it says, suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. Now, funny enough, that was my first drink I ever at 13 or 12 or something. I mixed whiskey and a glass of milk because I thought the same exact thing, that the milk would coat my stomach and like I would, because I didn't know how much the alcohol would affect me. I'd never taken a drink before. So I mixed whiskey with milk. That was my first drink. And then I'm reading this book, and this guy 700 years ago in a bar did the same thing. And he's telling me this story about that thought process. So, anyway, that was funny to me, for me, when I first started reading this. Okay. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but I felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into the milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. So now he's on three whiskeys. Let's see. Muji Brahman. There you go, brother, or whoever you are. Um, and thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. All right, so right now, I think there's two people here. And if you're hanging out, are you hanging out because you might have a problem with drinking? Or is this just some weird thing that you're like, what the hell is this about? I'm curious, you know? Hello. I'm curious to see there's two people hanging out, and I'm wondering why, you know? Um, Heather Morris. Hello. I'm trying to, read this because I've had a lot of good experience with this, the AA text, and for reasons beyond just not drinking. It's helped me in a number of ways. Um, but drinking obviously is one of the primary things. So I'm reading more about alcoholism today for the three of you that are now hanging out. Okay, so whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? So insanity um, would be writing the same number over and over and over again in the chat, right? That would be insanity, I think. But insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But my question the other day was, what if you do the same thing over and over again, knowing that the result sucks, but you do it anyway? What's that called? It's not insanity because you know what's going to happen, but you do it anyway. Why? Why do we do that? Well, the theory is that we have an allergic reaction to alcohol, which develops a phenomenon of craving, which overtakes our thinking, and we don't have the ability to overcome that thought process, and we're like driven almost by something bigger than ourselves to continue drinking, to take a drink and continue drinking. That's why it says we need spiritual help. And I'm a little bit all over the place, so I'm just going to keep reading here. You may think this an extreme case. To us, it is not far fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us, the first 100 people, and now millions more. Okay. I agree with this. Millions of people agree with this thought process. To us, it is not far fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characterized of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that paralleled with our own sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. Next day, we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity how it could have happened. In some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. Let's see here. Lost it. But even in this type of beginning, but even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. So here's where, like, I've given the example of a peanut allergy, right? To kind of just give us another way of thinking about this other than just alcohol. They give you this example of a jaywalker, which a jaywalker is someone who crosses the street, like anywhere on the street, not in the crosswalk, right? Jaywalking. So the jaywalker, he gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him as foolish as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him and he is slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he is hit again, and this time he has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce and he is held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day comes, but the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration is too ridiculous. So you might be going, dude, that's ridiculous. They know. But is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However, however intelligent we may have been in other respects where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. And I agree with free spirit. Come on, what is this? Let the drunks be drunk. I agree. Let them be drunk. What this is for a drunk who doesn't want to be a drunk anymore. And if that's the case, this shit right here is for that person, you know? But if they want to be a drunk and they want to keep drinking, by all means, do that. I have no problem with that. Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of the symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to. For we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. That may be true of certain non alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been as damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly any exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self knowledge. This is a point which we wish to emphasize and re emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers, as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. So, what it's saying is you could have all of the self knowledge in the world. You could know, you could fully map out every time you drink, this happens. When I drink, I do X, Y, and Z. It affects me in this way. I've been to the hospital, I've been to the detox, I've been to the jail, I've been, arrested, a DUI, whatever it is. You could have full, crystal clear knowledge. But that alone is not enough to, if you're an alcoholic or a potential alcoholic, that knowledge is not enough to come to the forefront of your mind when you're in a situation where you could reach for that first drink. Okay. It's two parts: self knowledge, all right, which is, steps 4 and 5. And then there's a spiritual solution, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So most of the steps are about the spiritual program, the spiritual solution. And then other steps are for self knowledge. So it is two parts, self knowledge and a spirit and spiritual health. And together, those two things can produce the essential psychic change to relieve the obsession for alcohol and allow us to have a productive, happy, fulfilling life, you know? So then it gives you another story here, gives you another illustration. And Fred, dude, let me tell you, Fred, who I'm about to read, is the fucking man. Okay. He's the man in every way, except when it comes to alcohol. Fred is a partner in a well known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married, and he's the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. To all appearance, he is stable, well balanced. He is a stable, well balanced individual. All right. Yet he is alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of the jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so in spite of his character and good standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self knowledge would fix it. And of course, and of course, he would think that because he's killed it in every other aspect of his life. Successful businessman, has a million friends, has a great wife, has beautiful children, going off to college, beautiful house, cool life. He's been able to handle and overcome every other challenge in his life. So, of course, he would be able to overcome his drinking problem, right? Duh. So, he went on his way, and we figure, yeah, he'll probably be all right. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day, we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all other concerns. Yet, He was flat on his back, nevertheless. So let him tell you about it. So then this is Fred telling you first person. I was much impressed with you fellows. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. Of course, he thought that, because that was the story of his life. He was able to succeed where other people had failed for his entire life. He was very successful. I felt I had every right to be self confident, that it would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time, all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. Big deal type shit. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. Nothing was wrong with him. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. So it says earlier, these men were not drinking to escape. And this is Fred. He's not drinking to escape anything. His fucking life is sick. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. This dude has been in the hospital twice for drinking, for the result of him drinking too much. I thought it would be nice. Okay, that's the craziness that precedes the first drink. You know, have you ever touched a hot stove and it burned the shit out of your hand? And it might be nice to do that again. No. Okay. So that was all, nothing more. I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail, two down. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me that a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty the next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. This guy has a happy marriage, but his wife is like, I'm not dealing with your drunk ass. She sent him a taxi, or in today's world, an Uber. Okay. The driver escorted me about for several days. So your wife or whoever sends you an Uber because they know you're drunk, they don't want to deal with you. And instead of going home, you're like, yo, hey, Uber, like, where's the Coke at? Right. And dude just drives you around for days and you guys party. That's what Fred did. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time, I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come, I would drink again. They had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen, and more, for what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. Two of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. So that's like step one. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. So they're not telling him about him, they're telling him about them. And that's how it is. That's how it works, that one alcoholic can affect another alcoholic like no one else can, as it says in the book. They they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had only been a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. And what I think he's talking about as pretty drastic is probably step 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. That's what I think is pretty drastic, because that's most people in the world will never do anything like those things, right? They are tough to do, right? But they're very rewarding. It's very rewarding to do, but it's not like normal. Most people don't go to everyone they've ever harmed and face to face make amends to those people. You know, they live and let live, or they let bygones be bygones, or they sweep it under the rug, or they bury the hatchet, or it's water under the bridge, forgive and forget. Not in this case, right? You go to those you've harmed and you make amends to those people, right? And then you live differently from that point on. You make amends and you live differently so as to not repeat those hurts and wrongs again to someone else or them again, you know? All right, so that's what he's saying. We're pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy, but the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. He said it, all right? That's his experience. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and, I hope, more useful than the life I lived before. His life before was not bad. He was a successful dude. He had a happy marriage. He had two good kids. He and his wife were great. They had a nice house, you know? His life was not bad, but he's saying that now his life is more useful. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one. Okay. But I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. Right. So that's my experience. Right. Even if I found out I could drink safely, I don't really have a desire to, you know, because there is the inevitable consequences of of a hangover tomorrow, or the health issue, whatever. It's just, to me, it's not worth it. Whatever little window of fun I'm gonna have with the high of alcohol, you know, it's not really worth it to me today. So that's what he's saying. I would not go back to it even if I could. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had felt only the first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. So Fred was like a high bottom drunk, which you'll hear in meetings. You'll hear people say that high bottom, right? But your bottom is your bottom. It doesn't matter. The bottom is where you stop digging. I heard that in treatment, right? 18 years, 19, 18 years ago, and that made a lot of sense to me. The bottom is where you stop digging. If this is as low as you want to go and you want to get yourself back in a better place in life, Great. You don't have to be a gutter, homeless, hospitalized, in jail, prison. You don't have to do all that shit, you know? So, anywho, Fred's story speaks for itself. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. So, this is a doctor. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless, apart from divine help. A doctor is saying that, right? So a scientist is saying, a medical science guy is saying, you were fucked aside from a divine spiritual miracle, right? Because even at a certain point, science and religion can agree on two things, right? There's more to this reality than we can see. There's more to it than we can taste and touch and see and feel. But what is it? The more, what is it? They're both trying to figure that out. Okay, divine help. Had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you if I had been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. And though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. And then, in case that bothers you, the next chapter is We Agnostics, which is the experience of people who didn't really believe in God. They did not believe in God, but they didn't believe in really. It's kind of like, whatever. That's an agnostic. So here's the last, sentence of more about alcoholism is his defense must come from a higher power. And you're like, oh, fuck that then. Right. Next chapter is exactly for that person who went, I don't know then. Right. Where they talk about higher power shit, right? God, spirituality. And we get into that. And to me, that's the brilliant aspect of this program, how it perfectly can help anybody, you know, whether you believe or don't believe, it doesn't matter. There's a way in there. It's just honesty, open minded, willing. Am I honestly open minded to say, all right, whatever, you know, I'll try it. And then willing to put in the work, you know, outlined as it's outlined in the 12 steps. If you're willing to do that, then incredible shit's going to happen. You know, you don't even have to worry about it. Just do the work like an IKEA, like putting together an IKEA piece of furniture. Just follow the directions. And before you know it, you're going to have a beautiful thing. All you got to do is follow directions. All right. Talk to you soon.